Devil May Cry 5 is the action hack and slash game that the industry really needed. For many years now, games in the genre have adopted From Software's Souls-like flow of battle, which is typically slower and simpler and more restrictive than traditional games in the genre. With the success of games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, the industry became infatuated with the Souls formula and the market became oversaturated with Souls clones. There was no longer a focus on pulling off combos, acquiring unique weapons, and mastering a character's moveset, much like in a fighting game. Instead, most games in the genre now emphasize positioning and memorizing enemy patterns in order to avoid lethal attacks and stay alive. Ninja Gaiden 2, God of War 3, Dante's Inferno, and Ninja Theory's Devil May Cry, or DMC, were some of the last great traditional hack and slash games ever made up until this point. From what I can remember, the last game in the genre that kept to a more traditional format with its combat was Bayonetta 2. And well, Bayonetta is a poor man's Devil May Cry, so there really hasn't really been a good game that's stayed true to the core roots of the genre until now. Like there hasn't been a game in the genre in years until Devil May Cry 5. Like I'm so happy that this game came out, man. Because last year we saw the release of God of War. It got a lot of critical praise and stuff, got 9s and 10s and got all these awards and stuff. Sony Santa Monica decided to change things up with the 4th entry in the series. They toned Kratos down. It had a more serious, more somber tone to it. They introduced the son Atreus. They added all these other, unnecessary. They added unnecessary RPG mechanics to it. They slowed the combat down. They did a lot of things that I'm gonna address in this video also, or at least kind of use it as a comparison against, a comparison to kind of compare it to Devil May Cry 5 now that I've beaten both games, now that I've played both games fully. But, I'll be honest with you guys. God of War 2018, and, in my opinion, God of War 2018 was a massive disappointment, and it's severely overrated. I've already, if you've been on this channel long enough, or if you've seen my other videos on God of War 2018, y'all already know how I feel about this. And if you haven't seen my videos, I'll go ahead and tell y'all that game, I was so hyped for that game. Just like anybody, just like most people, I was hyped for that game. I was so excited to see what they were gonna do with this game. And in comparison to Devil May Cry 5, God of War, now that I look back on it, it seems so unfocused. It seems unfocused in a way. It seems like they were trying to chase after so many different market trends. And there were so many, like there are people in the games industry that kind of look down on both the traditional, I guess you could say the traditional format of hack and slash games, and then they're just people that didn't really like the direction of the older God of War games, but now all of a sudden they're fans of the God of War franchise. Y'all don't think that's a little strange? They were fans of this new God of War. Like there are some people that weren't fans of the traditional God of War, but now this one hooked them. They like this new God of War instead of the older ones. So what has changed? They Sony Santa Monica, what they did with God of War, they put more focus on the narrative and the characters. Like I said, it got more serious. They toned down Kratos. He was no longer this loud, boisterous man just yelling and screaming, They took a lot of cues from The Last of Us. Whether y'all want to believe it or not, they did take cues from The Last of Us. And they kind of adopted a bit more of, like what I said earlier, how all these like action games are really taken from the Souls type combat. The combat in God of War, it's kind of more similar to Hellblade, but it's got a little bit of that Dark Souls DNA in it. Not in the sense that it's a hard game, because the game wasn't hard at all. Um, it's more like the game is it's slower. It's definitely way slower than the traditional games. And then they had the audacity to change the camera in that game. But they changed so much of the core gameplay, and this is what I like so much about Devil May Cry 5. Because with Devil May Cry 5, it was more focused. It, like, they knew what they were going to make. It seemed like the developers, they knew what they were going to make. They were more focused than what I saw, that effort from Sony Santa Monica. And just in comparison, Devil May Cry 5, let's go down the list. So Devil May Cry 5, because I made a whole list of stuff here, and I'm gonna kind of go through it. So Devil May Cry 5, more enemy variety. That's the first thing I have on this list. In comparison to God of War, let's look at both games. In terms of bosses, in terms of enemy, like just minor, or I guess you could say, well, just like minor enemies or whatever. Devil May Cry 5 has better bosses. Devil May Cry 5 might be a shorter game. It might be more limited in its scope. But I feel like, and this is why I say that that the team that did Devil May Cry 5, this is why I say that they're more focused. That they had more focus. Cause they didn't decide to go, oh, we're gonna do a big open world, or at least in the case of God of War, it wasn't a big open world, but it was kind of a semi-open world. Like, there was kind of, you could say it was kind of hub worlds, but it was definitely more open than what we were used to. And they've said in the past, Sony Santa Monica, I believe actually Cory Barlog actually said that, they ran out of budget. So that's why you didn't have more boss battles. That's why you didn't have, that's why there weren't a lot more boss battles and a lot more enemy variety. But see, they sacrificed all of that for what? For presentation? For tacked on RPG mechanics? And crap like that? Devil May Cry 5, go play that game now. There's so many different enemies in this game. So many different enemies in so many ways that you have to take them down. That you have to memorize, that you have to, well, not even memorize, they all have their own way of attacking, their own movement and stuff. Way more enemies, and even just getting into the bosses of Devil May Cry 5. The bosses, there are so many different bosses in this game. The enemy, not only the enemy, not only the way that the enemies, the way that they attack is so diverse. Like the different type of enemies that you face, it's the character designs and the enemy designs themselves are more creative, more original in Devil May Cry 5 than in God of War 2018. In God of War 2018, what I remember the most is fighting the same freaking trolls and the same freaking those little ice and the ice and fire and rock or earth golem things. You fight the same freaking enemies over and over and over. You can tell that they ran out of budget. And it's crazy because God of War has a bigger, obviously I don't think they ever put out God of War's budget or whatever, or even Devil May Cry's budget or whatever, but I truly believe that God of War has a way bigger budget. A way bigger budget than Devil May Cry 5. And what did it do for that? Okay, you got great voice acting, that's cool. You got strong narrative, strong characters. I'll give God of War, I'll give them credit for that. And God of War has great puzzles, Devil May Cry 5's puzzles, they're very basic puzzles, But in comparison, that's all I can really say. That's all I can really say good about God of War, just those things that I just listed off. Because when we're talking about boss battles, So I already talked about the lackluster enemies that you face, and I obviously haven't covered all of the enemies in God of War, but the God of War's enemies, they weren't good. They lack variety. They're definitely lack variety, And in the boss battles themselves, there were only like three. There were like three good boss battles. The fight with the dragon, the fight with what's his name? I think his name was Boulder, the like one of the main antagonists. The two fights with Boulder, the fight with Boulder in the beginning of the game. I guess that's how you say the guy's name. I might be mispronouncing it. Forgive me, but the fight in the beginning with Boulder, the fight at the ending with Boulder, and then the fight against the dragon. Those were the best fights in the game. There's only three. I want to say there's only like, so there's three good fights, but I think there's only like, well, there's three good boss battles, I should say. But I think there's only like, what, 5 or maybe 6 bosses in the game. There's so, like, God of War 2018, to me, it felt like a soulless game. It felt like they were taking elements from other games and just tacking it on. The RPG mechanics, even to this day, I'm trying to figure out, why the heck am I dressing up Kratos? Why is there all these little RPG, why is there these useless mechanics in there? I'm sitting up there leveling up, I'm leveling up so slowly, and I don't feel like I'm getting any stronger. And then the combat, let's just get to the combat. Let's get to the combat. Because here's the thing. So even on Devil May Cry 5, like even on its side, you got, like I said, more enemy variety. Getting back to the list, more enemy variety. It's a way better paced game, and I know people like, why did they make such a big deal about, oh my god, the game never cuts? Yeah, there's no loading screen. That's cool. A lot of games, you know, I'll say this, yeah, God of War, there's no loading screens, you know, and it does have one cut, and I don't know why people act like there wasn't any cuts. There was one cut, just one cut, I want to say. One cut at the, like, by the end of, like maybe, like, near the end of God of War game, I don't want to spoil where it is, but there is one cut. They did kind of cheat, but there is one cut in that game. And if you beat the game, you probably know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the game had no cuts. And Devil May Cry 5, to be fair, it does have, you know, loading. It does have the traditional loading screen, and it does cut to different cutscenes and stuff. But to be honest, that's not a big deal. I'm trying to figure out what the big deal is. Like, it would be a big deal if the loading took a long time, and it doesn't take that long to load. And the cutscenes are great looking. They're great to watch. So I don't have a problem with the game, with going from a battle and then walking a little bit and then cutscene and then walking a little bit, you know, traversing the level and then fighting and then cutscene. I have no problem with that flow because it doesn't break the flow at all. It doesn't break the flow of the gameplay at all, really. You know, it's not really that noticeable, or it's not something that's gonna like bring down. It wasn't something that brought down Devil May Cry 5's experience. Like I said, in comparison, just comparing the gameplay. So, Devil May Cry 5, it definitely had more depth and gameplay variety. I feel like I've said this also in my God of War's review. Devil May Cry 5, in comparison to God of War 2018, God of War 2018 had some of the worst. Like, its combat is so simplified and so basic. You can't even really pull off combos and stuff. And here's the thing, because they changed the camera to like this more close-up, this more closed-in camera angle, this more kind of like third-person, more close-up camera. It made it hard to really fight hordes of enemies. It made it hard to fight multiple enemies at once because there might be an enemy to your side. And I know that people love to defend this game, talking about some, oh, well they have a button where like they have a something you can do where like you can turn around. You know, you can do that quick turn or whatever. And yeah, I know you can do that. That doesn't help because when there's someone at your side that you cannot see because the way the camera is, Like the combat in this game, I don't care what anyone says. It is not only worse than Devil May Cry 5 or any Devil May Cry game at that. I would say that it's worse than its predecessors. Its predecessors, even when you compare God of War to the games to the other games in the series. When you compare God of War 2018 to God of War 1, God of War 2, God of War 3, Ascension, any of the God of War games, those games had more depth than this God of War, than the new God of War. It had more depth. It was faster paced. You know what's crazy? God of War 2018 is 30 frames per second, or at least it's not 60. I know for a fact. I don't even have to look that up right now. It's not 60. But guess what? Guess what is 60 frames per second? Guess what does run extremely fast, right? Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5 has, like I said, it has more depth and more gameplay variety. Now, how's that? Let's see. God of War 2018, you're pretty limited in what you can do. But in Devil May Cry 5, you have not one, not two, but three characters. Three characters that all play, they all play differently. They all have their own moveset, their own weapons and stuff. And they all have their own nuances. Like, you don't get Dante until like almost halfway through the game, I want to say. And when you get him, and you're introduced to these different styles that Dante has, and then you're constantly getting weapons for Dante in this game. He has a whole arsenal of weapons. Like, I got to like mission 17 or mission 16 or whatever, and this man, and there's 20 missions in the game, but like I'm still unlocking weapons. I'm like, how many weapons does this man have? There's so much variety in the gameplay, and so many options in Devil May Cry 5. This is how an action game is supposed to be. This is how it's always been. Even compared to other games that I mentioned before, like Ninja Gaiden 2. Like any of the Ninja Gaiden games, like Ninja Gaiden Black or whatever. Dante's Inferno. I would say even Bayonetta's even like that. I can't say for certain because I haven't really played it. But here's what I'll say. You know, it's not only a better focused game, even though it had a smaller budget. It's insane when you really compare the two games, because you know for a fact whether or not they tell us the budget of these two games, you know that Devil May Cry 5 was a smaller game to make. And yeah, it's running on that Resident Evil 2 engine. And I will say both games look phenomenal. Even God of War, it looks good. Devil May Cry 5, it looks good. Maybe God of War, maybe I'll give God of War the edge when it comes to graphics. But definitely, since the game doesn't run at 60 frames per second, because when you look at God of War, yeah, I will say that maybe God of War looks better. But the God of War's presentation, like, they sacrifice speed. They sacrifice the speed, you know, the performance for a great presentation. So I said this before. Obviously, Devil May Cry 5 has better, more varied boss battles. It's not the same. It's not going through the same motions over and over with their boss battles. And I don't want to hear no one saying, "Oh, but the Valkyries." Oh my God, those have to be like, oh my God, the Valkyries. Those fights are not hard. Those fights aren't good. Just to be blunt with it. And there was some boss battle. I think it was maybe one or two of the Valkyries and maybe a few boss battles. Again, it's been a while since I've played God of War, but God of War did this thing where, and I can say that did it at least 2 or 3 times, where, hey, you're supposed to be fighting this big boss, right? But you know what? Let's just throw a bunch of minor enemies your way, right? Let's throw a bunch of minor enemies in with the big boss. And here's what I love about Devil May Cry 5. Because, like I said, there's so many different bosses in this game, But there's a lot of one-on-one bosses where it's just you have to focus on this boss and figure out their ball and figure out their pattern, figure out their attack pattern, their movement pattern, and the game is challenging. That's one thing I could say. God of War didn't really give me a challenge. Even on its normal difficulty, even on its hardest difficulty, God of War is not a challenging game. It's not. Devil May Cry 5 is a challenging game, even on its normal difficulty. And I'm not going to ever pretend to be this great, like somebody who's really great at video games. I know I'm not that very good at video games. You know, I have no problem admitting that. But here's the thing. So even on a normal difficulty of Devil May Cry 5, it was still giving me a challenge. It was still giving me a challenge. So I know once I do master the game on the normal difficulty and then raise the difficulty up, I know that this game is gonna definitely give me even like a better challenge. It's already giving me a better challenge than God of War. Other than, you know, like I said, the enemy and boss designs, you know, you know, the enemy boss designs, they are varied. You know, they get really creative with some of the boss designs. There's well, I don't want to spoil some of the bosses that you're gonna face. I won't try to describe them or anything like that. But I think that, like, the last thing that I really have on this list that I wanted to go over was Devil May Cry 5 has great level design. The later levels in the game have multiple, I want to say one or two of them, well, actually not one or two. I know it's probably two of them near the end of the game. Those levels, they have multiple paths that you can go on, right? And there are multiple levels that are designed. There are levels that are designed for multiple characters. Do you know how much time had to go into that? Like I said, Devil May Cry 5 is only 20 missions, but there's so much there. They didn't have to, and that's another thing, because a lot of God of War felt like padding. Even though the narrative, like the story of God of War was just like, oh, we have to spread it, and please forgive me if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but we have to spread Atreus' mother's ashes over the mountain or whatever. The pacing in the game, it just felt like that dragged on so much to get to that one objective. And then by the end of the game, once you get to that like post-credit stinger or whatever, like when you go back to the house and then these two characters shows up or whatever. Like I said, I vaguely remember this crap because it really wasn't that memorable. But the game didn't really feel complete, right? It didn't really feel complete in comparison to Devil May Cry 5. I mean, I feel like just overall, Devil May Cry 5 is the better package here. It's the way better package here. Devil May Cry 5, just to go over the list again. Just so y'all can kind of get a big, just so y'all can get you know, the entire thing that I'm trying to say here. Devil May Cry 5, more enemy variety, better pacing, more depth and gameplay variety. It's better focus. It did more on a smaller budget. Better, more varied boss battles. It was streamlined. And that's another thing. They streamlined the combat. From what I remember of like Devil May Cry and then like Devil May Cry 3, which were like the only ones that I really played like that. I mean, I played Devil May Cry 4 also, but I played that briefly. They streamlined the combat without sacrificing the depth that players like, that players come to expect from the series. 60 frames per second, like I said, it runs at 60 frames. Enemy and boss designs are varied and creative. Great level design, like I said, the level design in this game, and I don't even think reviewers are really giving this game credit when it comes to just its level design, because this is really good. And then on God of War side, I would say, you know, God of War, it had, like I said, it had better puzzles. Yeah, it had a stronger. I would say that God of War has a stronger narrative and stronger characters. I mean, with me, I can't really say too much about Devil May Cry's story because I haven't played Devil May Cry 1 and 2, and I played Devil May Cry 3 briefly as a child, and I played Devil May Cry 4 briefly, but I never, like, the only Devil May Cry game that I beat prior to Devil May Cry 5 is DMC because I couldn't have the other games back in the day, so I didn't get to like finish them or anything like that. So I can't really speak on the narrative, like the entire overall story of Devil May Cry. I can't speak on that. But the story in the game, I will say this: Devil May Cry 5 story, it's not too hard to follow. They give you like you don't really need to play the other games to really understand everything that's going on. And that's something that I appreciate. It's not like Kingdom Hearts. It's not like a game like Kingdom Hearts where like it's confusing or whatever. It's like overly complicated for no reason. It's nothing like that. But like I said, God of War, strong narrative, strong characters, great presentation, great score, and of course Devil May Cry 5 has a great soundtrack also. Like I said, good puzzles and stuff, but I felt like for the most part, God of War, they sacrificed so much. It didn't feel like God of War anymore. With all the stuff that they took out, with all the stuff that they changed. It honestly felt like a soulless game. It felt like, and it honestly didn't feel like anything different when you compare it to just other Sony games. It felt like it was following a formula. Like it felt so carbon copy. Like I don't even know how to put it into words other than to like the best way I can describe it is it felt like a mutated. It just felt like like I said, it felt like they just took so much from other franchises, right? So it felt like this mutated abomination that was just unrecognizable to me. And Devil May Cry 5, they didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They streamlined a few things, they changed a few things here and there, but overall the developers, they knew what they wanted. They knew what they wanted to achieve with the game, and they achieved it. And yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about this. I know this is a long video. I was kind of ranting and stuff here, but honestly, I just wanted to really just put everything out there. Devil May Cry 5 is the better game. It's the action game. It's the action game that we need here. It is probably going to be my game of the year this year, depending on what else comes out. But it's definitely a contender for game of the year. I don't think that this game is going to get the same amount. Like it's gotten great reviews and stuff, but I don't think people are going to like. I don't think like when award season come around, I don't think that people are going to praise this as much as they did God of War, because for some reason, like, and that's another thing. Because if you focus on narrative, because a lot of these games journalists, they can't play games, so they're more impressed with, oh my god, does it have a great story? Oh, it has a great story. Doesn't matter about the gameplay. Doesn't matter about the gameplay being weak. But yeah, man, I'm done. This is more of a rant, and I apologize. At first, I was gonna script this thing out, but I honestly don't feel like doing that. I just wanted to just go off the cuff with this. So apologies, the video's long. I know it. Some of y'all probably already clicked off the video, gotten mad, gotten all pissed off over someone else's opinion. Y'all got mad, hit the dislike button, whatever. That's fine. I'm out of here. Peace.